Thanks, everybody, for joining us virtually this evening. This is a meeting of the Standing Committee on Rules and Procedures. My name is Kevin O'Reilly, and I'm the MLA for Frame Lake, and I serve as the chair of the committee. Tonight's meeting is being live streamed on the Assembly's social media channels. To respect social distancing requirements, non-committee members and the Chief Electoral Officer will be attending by video conference. I'd like to remind all members and the Chief Electoral Officer that all comments, questions, and remarks should come through myself as the chair. Members and the witness, if you could kindly wait to be recognized, and I'll direct traffic as we move forward. Our first order of business is to open our meeting with prayer. I'm going to ask MLA Norn if you would like to do a prayer for us this evening. Thanks.
And with that prayer, I'd like to thank the Creator tonight for another beautiful evening, another beautiful day, and to be thankful for the roles that we've been given. And I asked again the Creator for your strength and to give us focus and to help us keep our resolve and help us do our very best for the people that we serve. Merci, John.
RC, Mr. Norn. Our next item of business, because we are conducting this as if it's a regular committee meeting, is we need to review and adopt the agenda. Mr. Clerk, would you walk us through the agenda, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The agenda for this evening, committee is beginning its public review of the report of the Chief Electoral Officer on the administration of the 2019 general election, with a public hearing with the Chief Electoral Officer. And that is the only item of business, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Clerk. Any additions to the agenda from any of the committee members? Seeing none, okay. Can I get a motion to approve the agenda? Mr. Simpson, thank you. All in favor? We're okay with the agenda? Thank you. So the agenda has been moved and adopted. Having reviewed and adopted the agenda, are there any declarations of conflict of interest? Mr. Simpson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I may have a perceived conflict on item 9 on page 3 of 10 of the briefing notes, and when the matter arises, I request that you notify me at the appropriate time, and I'll remove myself from discussion in the chamber until the matter is dispensed with. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thanks. And just for greater clarity, that would be the recommendation from the Chief Electoral Officer about
indebtedness to
changing who's eligible to serve or to run as a candidate. Okay, thanks very much for that, Mr. Simpson. So I think we can move forward. Committee this evening, we're joined by Nicole Latour, the Chief Electoral Officer of the Northwest Territories. This evening, the committee will begin its public review of the report of the Chief Electoral Officer on the administration of the 2019 general election. Just for the interest of those that are watching, we do intend to hold additional public meetings where the public will be able to comment on the conduct of the last election and any changes that they may want to recommend in terms of future elections. We'll be holding those meetings later in the summer, and they will be advertised. There'll also be an opportunity for members of the public to make submissions to the committee as well as part of our process as well. And those details will be released in the coming weeks. And of course, committee would welcome input from our citizens and the public as we move forward with our work on the last election, reviewing the last election. So before we move to the Chief Electoral Officer for opening remarks, I'm hoping that we could get the committee members to introduce themselves for the record, and I'm going to start on my left here with Mr. Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Shane Thompson. I'm the MLA for Nahende. Thank you.
Jackie Jacobson, MLA for Nunavut.
Steve Norn, member for Tunisia.
Rocky Simpson, MLA for Hay River South.
Thanks. And my name is Kevin O'Reilly, MLA for Frame Lake. As I mentioned, we're joined in the room by three of our staff members as well. Mr. Balls serves as our clerk. We have Mr. Dunbar here as the advisor to the committee, and we're joined by a committee intern, a clerk intern, Mr. James Thomas as well. So thanks to everybody for introducing themselves. Without any further ado, Ms. Latour, we'd like to turn the meeting over to you. I believe you have some remarks that you'd like to provide about your report.
Great. Can everybody hear me fine? Great. Good evening, everybody, Mr. Chairman and committee members. Thank you for your time spent reviewing the Chief Electoral's report on the administration of the 2019 Territorial General Election and for the opportunity to discuss it with you this evening. My opening remarks are very brief. I'll begin by saying that the 2019 Territorial General Election, in my opinion, was a very successful event. Statistically speaking, the event saw 531 more electors attend the polls over the 2015 Territorial General Election. So attendance increased 10% to achieve a voter participation rate of 54%. The underpinnings of the event's success, I believe, can be directly attributed to three concentrations: innovating through leveraging technology, heightened education, and young elector outreach. Most notably, with respect to leveraging technology, the Northwest Territories now has the distinction of being the first electoral jurisdiction in Canada to offer their electorate the option to cast their ballot by means of an online platform. This effort made ballots available to eligible electors who may have been away from home or unable to attend a bricks and mortar poll. Technology also played an integral role in making wide-ranging educational materials and training available to all election stakeholders. Election officers undertook a significant portion of their training on a newly developed online learning management system from their home communities. Further online, prospective candidates and official agents could readily access newly developed statutory information videos, event documents, and instructional presentations. And finally, technology assisted in educating electors through disseminating information essential to their participation, and was also instrumental in delivering a robust event marketing campaign using social media platforms. Additionally, efforts to engage young eligible electors through a territory-wide ambassador program and a poll worker recruitment initiative, along with focused social media outreach, also proved to be well rewarded. With the event now complete, the recommendations contained in my report have been proposed to incorporate lessons learned and see best practices adopted as a means to ensure clarity and the best experiences for all election stakeholders. The majority of the 88 recommendations in my report submitted for amendment, repeal, or review are mostly administrative in nature. 61 recommendations specific to Division B of the Elections and Plebiscite Act have been proposed to better define and ensure currency of the various polls. The additional 27 recommendations are proposed to refine election administration and address electorate concerns. Again, thank you for the opportunity to discuss, perhaps clarify, and answer any of your questions this evening.
Great, thanks very much, Ms. Latour. I believe your report was actually tabled in the House towards the end of May by the Speaker. Is the report available on the Elections NWT website as well? Do you know, Ms. Latour?
Yeah, it is. There's a link right on the front page that will take you directly to it if you can't find your way through the site.
Great. Okay, thanks. Really appreciate that. So I'd like to open the floor to questions from the committee members. Mr. Thompson, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. In the report, it talks about contracts existing with companies for platforms there. So could you advise us what's the annual cost to host each platform as we moving forward, or this last election? Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Thompson. Sorry, I just zoned out there for a second. Ms. Latour, please go ahead.
Could the member be a little bit more specific which platform he's speaking of? There's so many involved.
So
Thanks, Ms. Latour. Mr. Thompson, please go
thank
ahead.
you, Mr. Chair. So, Mr. Chair, when I'm looking at the report, there was 5 online platforms used by Elections NWT. My understanding are 4 hosted by private companies, and then my understanding the 5th one is actually Elections NWT website, which is hosted by or looked after by the GNWT. So I guess my question is in regards to those 5 platforms, what is the annual cost, especially with the ones that are private companies moving forward? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Thompson. And I believe, though, that the companies are actually named on page 18 of your report. I'm going to come off here. Electorhood is hosted by Coldfront Labs. There was Elections NWT Learning Management System hosted by Kellett Communications. Elections NWT Elections Management System hosted by DataFix. Online voting platform hosted by Simply Voting. So I think those were the ones that you were interested in asking about. So Ms. Latour, if you have that information, please go ahead.
Okay. The Elections NWT website, of course, is hosted by the GNWT, so there is no cost associated with that. Electorhood, which I've brought home. Electorhood was developed by Coldfront Labs. I went out to RFP and Coldfront Labs of Ottawa developed it, and through the development cost, which was over around 78,000 is my recollection. I don't have the specific numbers in front of me. They hosted it or supported it through the event. So that system is now hibernated, and I've brought it back to the territory. I would like it to be administered here. So there is a nominal fee with Kellett, who has it at in hibernation for us, and that is just it's less than a couple of $1,000 a year to continue to update it as it sits in hibernation. So that's one cost. The learning management system is something that negotiated with the Department of Municipal Community Affairs to use their framework for free, and we spent probably about 50,000. And again, don't quote me. I can get you firm figures if you'd like to develop the instructional videos and all the content that goes into it. And the work for those went to Northern Contractors. And again, it's in hibernation, so there's sort of a more significant cost in preparing the site that won't occur again, and also it's in hibernation with Kellett again, just to keep it updated through the hibernation period. So when we bring it live again prior to the next event, it's not such an arduous task. DataFix is a company out of Toronto. They manage the register for us. That is an ongoing contract, and that's negotiated for a 4-year period. It was around the neighborhood of 60 or 70,000. I'm going to say, and I think that's high. I can't remember exactly. And again, that's an ongoing. We utilize 5 different modules for them that they provide to us in an election year, such as the real-time lists, Find My Polling Station, all the background for registering as a voter online, et cetera, et cetera. And we keep them for a 4-year period in the event that we have any by-election activity. So that it can just be brought back to life. But again, it's sitting hibernating. The online voting platform, was around $50,000, $55,000. That was to again develop it, build it, and it's probably again a first-time platform, a more significant cost than it will be in 2023, and there is no cost for it to sit and hibernate for us. So it was just the customization and the functionality that we required for making it available to the electorate.
Okay, thanks very much. That's helpful information. And I know I was trying to scribble down all of the numbers, but if you could provide us with the amounts for those, and generally, I know there's a description in your report about what they did, so if you could give us the amounts, I think that would be helpful. Mr. Thompson, do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, a few.
Yep, okay, go for it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So when we're talking about these different platforms and about the money we had here, so is this a yearly fee? And you talked about hibernation. So do we have a cost that we have to pay for the hibernation for it to be looked after? So I guess it's two questions, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Thompson. And just before I go to you, Ms. Latour, I just want to recognize Caitlin Cleveland, the MLA for Cam Lake, joined us at the beginning of the meeting. I'm sorry I forgot to mention that she's joined us virtually for this meeting. So welcome, Caitlin. Thanks for joining us. Ms. Latour, can you respond to Mr. Thompson's question? Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. The costs that I'm going to share with you at a later date are just quite a few of them are developmental costs, and I don't think we'll experience the same level of cost for 2023 to use the platforms. The hibernation, I mean, like I said, there's zero cost for our website, but the hibernation is about $2,000 a year just to push updates to the hibernated sites. So there's no hibernation cost with DataFix. That's a fixed cost for the 4-year contract, and we can provide them data dumps and keep the list as fresh as we wish. But through that agreement, they're available to us. So the only two that are really subject to hibernation costs are Electorhood and the learning management system. And again, that's my recollection. It's about $2,000 a year on inactive years.
Okay. Thanks, Ms. Latour. Mr. Thompson, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Latour. So when we talk about $2,000, is that $2,000 per platform or $2,000 total? I guess that would be my next question, and I have a couple more with your permission, Mr. Chair.
Yep, thanks, Mr. Thompson. Ms. Latour, please go ahead.
Yes, in order to do the updates, there's a specified amount of man hours that will be required to ensure the updates are undertaken. So it's $2,000 a year for each platform, for the two platforms.
Okay, thanks, Ms. Latour. Mr. Thompson?
Yeah, thank you. And thanks, Ms. Latour, for that. So when we developed or picked these five platforms, and ones that are private, so was there a process? Did we go out to tender? Was there, I think you talked about an RFP. Was that done for all the platforms moving forward? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Mr. Thompson. Ms. Latour?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We did RFP the development of Electorhood. The learning management system for the election officers we managed internally in our office, and DataFix is an ongoing relationship that we've had. We used them in the 2015 election as well. So that was just a sort of a contract renewal, and I negotiated with DataFix because the system of the online platform worked seamlessly, and I believe, Mr. Chair, you saw this when you attended the PEI exercise. So they and the voter registration system that we use with DataFix is the same system that we use to administer the online absentee ballots and mail ballots. So it was sort of it was a subcontract, really, although it was provided by a different company, the actual development. So if that makes sense to you.
Okay. Thanks, Ms. Latour. I think you covered them all except simply voting. Can you just talk a little bit about how, we both went to Prince Edward Island and saw a plebiscite back in 2017, I think it was. And some of these companies were doing online voting there, and it went quite well. So, but maybe you can just talk a little bit about how you decided to go with simply voting. Thanks.
Yeah, sure, Mr. Chair. Again, it came down to the ease of and relative quickness of putting together a system. So DataFix had an agreement with Simply Voting. It's Simply Voting software. So they identified that as a Simply Voting platform, but the actual contract, which was an additional $55,000, was with DataFix, and they managed it as well. They managed how it came together and meeting the needs. So my interaction to prepare for the online balloting was mostly I did talk with the people at Simply Voting on occasion, like once or twice, to be completely honest. Everything else was project managed through DataFix. So that was it. Like I said, that was the subcontract agreement was between Simply Voting and DataFix.
Thanks very much for that, Mr. Thompson.
Yeah, I have one last question on
Sure.
this area here. So in regards to the information that is put into these platforms and that, who has the legal rights to them? Is it us as a GNWT or Elections NWT, or is it the companies themselves? Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Thompson. Ms. Latour?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Mr. Chair. The data belongs to the Office of the Chief Electoral Officer, and we have a very explicit and rigorous security-laden contract with how DataFix protects that information. So Simply Voting isn't really privy to it. It all happens in the DataFix environment and DataFix's servers. So it stays protected. All of the systems were vetted by Hitachi Security Systems and passed really well.
Mr. Thompson, no, you're good?
On
Okay.
platforms, I'm good.
Just while we're on the issue of these service providers and the electronic voting, did any other committee members have any questions on these matters while we're on this topic? Mr. Norton, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I had a quick question on Simply Voting. I know there was some tentativeness about using to make the voting online last election, and so how it was reported explained to me that when someone went to vote, the security of this was akin to online banking. Can you just expand on it? Can you just explain how good the security was in terms of Simply Voting? Thank you.
Thanks. Ms. Latour, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I mean, I'll do my best, but I'm not a technical person at all. So what I did is I had a partnership with the Office of the Chief Information Officer, and there was a team that oversaw the penetration vulnerability testing of all my systems, and I don't know the language. All I know that it underwent two separate, I think they call it gray box or black box testing, and it generated a report and found very, very minor things, absolutely nothing that needed to be corrected. So it's if you would like specific information, I can absolutely provide you with the Hitachi reports or some further information from the Office of the Chief Information Officer on the exercise, because I've got to be truly honest, I don't understand that background part of it.
Thanks for that, Ms. Latour. Mr. Noor?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, I guess, I think it's important that going forward, I'll be thankful to get that information, by the way, but it'll be good to put voters at ease to know if they want, in the future, if they want to use this, to make sure that they have confidence in our systems.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Noor. So I think what we'd like to do, Ms. Latour, is you mentioned that, and it's on page 19 of your report, that Hitachi Systems Security did some testing, I guess, of how the entire system went together. Is there some way you could provide, if there's a summary report or some reports from those folks that just talk about how they did their testing, what the results and so on were? Would you be able to share that with the committee?
Yeah, absolutely. I can get a copy of it. I probably have one, but it's hard for me to decipher, and send you over the actual Hitachi reports.
Okay, no, thanks. That would be great. I know, I think there were similar sort of audit reports that we saw when we visited Prince Edward Island, and a lot of it was way over my head. But I think given this was the first time that this was done here, it'd be helpful for us to understand how they tested the system and what the results and so on were. So that would be great. Committee members, any other concerns, issues, questions on this part of the Chief Electoral Officer's report? No? Okay. Any other matters that people would like to ask questions of around? Well, I've got some. The youth outreach, and I know that you talked about this in your opening remarks, and there's some coverage of it in your report as well, and I saw a lot of it during the campaign in terms of social media and other kinds of advertising. I'm just wondering whether some jurisdictions have well, let's start with one other change that was made in this election. We lowered the residency requirements from 1 year living here to 6 months with changes to the Elections and Plebiscites Act. Do you have any views about whether that increased the number of eligible voters, turnout, or so on? Any influence in terms of how the voter participation in the last election as a result of that change? Thanks.
I'm not sure if decreasing the residency requirement played a huge role on it. Decreasing the residency recommendation in 2015 really stemmed from aligning ourselves with the other jurisdictions in the country. So there's nothing specifically that I can say that the greater turnout is tied to that.
Okay, thanks, Ms. Latour. I'm just wondering how that residency reduction in the residency requirement, how that was communicated to young people, and whether that might have made a difference in terms of youth participation in the last election. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I'm going to suggest that a lot of the young people that did engage were already well beyond a 6-month residency. So I'm not inclined to say that that had an effect on the turnout of the youth. I think some of our other initiatives in trying to have a youth ambassador in every community and initiate peer-to-peer discussion rather than taking a sort of preachy, you should be doing this or not, to have the young people talk amongst themselves about what mattered to them and to educate that that once they turned 18, that they were an eligible elector. I think it gets lost between 17 years old, you get to get your driver's license, and 19 years of age, you can enter a drinking establishment. So we think that the effort we hired a coordinator to oversee the program and to do the outreach with schools and youth centers as well to get young poll workers, and through the ambassador programs and then a very very present having presence on social media platforms, and through some of the engines that are provided there to make sure that individuals between the ages of 18 and 35 saw our messaging and had an awareness about the event, and that their voice mattered. I think those were key in getting young people to come out. We attended a number of events. My staff, I was fortunate to have great, capable young people working for me, and they went out and attended and also talked to young people as well. We simplified the voter's guide so that it's just not so, I think, intimidating is the better word. So it's now a pocket-sized, more infographic, but very comprehensive at the same time. So it was more about making things a little bit more attractive to them as well in the branding. And so we did that in a different way as well. To not seem so black and white and government document type of approach. So those are the things that I think really connected with the young electors and perhaps helped increase their turnout.
Okay, thanks very much for that. Were there specific initiatives to try to reach out to you talked about how there's quite a range of youth voters that you were trying to reach, probably from about 18 to in the maybe early 30s. Were there specific methods or ways that you were trying to reach, say, the youngest and versus the older ones in that sort of span of age? Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. The young electors or youth are defined as 18 to 30 or 35 years old, which is quite surprising to me, actually, because I think when you're in your late 20s and early 30s, you're well into being a mature person and starting a family and et cetera. So there was maybe a bit more focus in the area of 18 to 24-year-olds, and we tried, again, to align ourselves with the Department of Education, Culture, and Employment and get data and be able to specifically have a direct marketing with the young people that are away at school. We did encounter some difficulties on that through access to information, and that young people who provide information for student finance, for example, did not necessarily give us, their authorization to have their data shared with us. So what data we did get, we got without birth dates and things of that nature. So that it was quite difficult, and I talk about that in my report that we need to be able to perhaps compel this data from some departments, and we need to be specific in that it includes information that's of use to us, which is primarily one of the primary ones is the age, birth dates.
Yeah. Okay, well, that sort of leads into one other question I got, which is, I guess, there's vital statistics with Health and Social Services that issues birth certificates and all, keeps track of that kind of thing in motor vehicles. Is there some way to work with those folks to get information that you could use to help make sure that younger voters to be, say 16 and 17-year-olds, are I don't know, given some information materials that would encourage them to participate when they turn 18 in elections. Or were any of your activities targeted at that group before that they're actually eligible to become to vote? Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Absolutely. But to be completely frank, we got denied by motor vehicles to have their data because they're not explicitly listed in the Elections and Plebiscites Act. So that is something, a recommendation that I would like to see them included so that we can compel that data. We use Elections Canada data as our backbone data, and then we introduce a number of data sets. But we have to be very careful about some of those sets because some of them are what we call dirty. They're not accurate or they're not up to date. There's no standardization in GNWT departments on how we collect data. So it can be we get a data dump and it can be a whole bunch of information in one cell. We generally trade data in Excel formats. And so sometimes we can compel the data, but it's not useful data. So I think that there is some work to be done, and any specifics or additions to the Elections and Plebiscites Act with respect to being able to have access to a number of different data sets would be great. In particular with motor vehicles, that's a value to us, is I believe they capture citizenship. And so that would be something to help. The health data, you don't have to be a Canadian citizen, for example, but you're still entitled to have health care. So we work really hard to ensure the accuracy and completeness of the register. And so there's a lot of work that goes on in the background with DataFix as our data managers to ensure the accuracy and currency and completeness of the list. So there's some recommendations that do touch upon it.
Thanks. Any other questions on the issue of young electors from anybody? Mr. Simpson, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm curious to know if we track the young voters, Indigenous versus non-Indigenous voters. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Mr. Simpson. Ms. Latour?
No, we do not deal with ethnicity just as much as we don't generally deal with gender very much. I mean, there was a recommendation last time or not on my part, but from committee to have gender removed, and we find that very valuable, but we do not capture ethnicity.
Okay, thanks, Ms. Latour. Mr. Simpson?
Yeah, I'm curious about that because I'm not sure if there would be a different method or a different way of encouraging Indigenous or non-Indigenous youth or adults for that matter to get out and vote. I guess when I look at a process, I'm not sure if the process is geared towards a more of a non-Indigenous type society. And I'm not sure if that's a consideration. It sounds like it's not, so I'm just kind of wondering why.
Thanks, Mr. Simpson. Ms. Latour, I don't know, were there conscious efforts on your part to develop, any youth programs or promotion that might appeal more to young Indigenous peoples, or I, you know, I guess we're just trying to find out if you may have found ways to reach out in particular to young Indigenous voters. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I mean, if the legislators felt that there may be a concern in that arena, as the first and only Indigenous Chief Electoral Officer in Canada, I was approached by the Chief Electoral Officer of Nova Scotia, and I worked with him and prepared a strategy on First Nations engagement over there. They implemented it, and it was very successful. We can absolutely, if legislators feel that's something that we should concentrate on, we can absolutely do something of that nature here. In short, that strategy put essentially an ambassador type person, but it allowed the groups over there, the First Nations over there, to be a real partner in that, in who it was a job creation and an engagement effort at the same time. And they also were solicited for guidance on, again, when polls and where polls should be held on the different First Nation lands. So that is something that we can easily focus on if that's the direction I'm provided to go.
Thanks, Ms. Latour. Mr. Simpson?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just, I guess, one more question, and I guess the reason I bring that up is because when I look at the stats, you look at Indigenous people, our correctional centers are filled with them, and unemployment rate is probably higher, homelessness is higher. So there's, the issue kind of trickles down into access for them to actually vote. If they don't have the proper ID and address. So that's why I raised that issue. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Simpson. Ms. Latour?
Yeah, so we absolutely recognize that as an issue, particularly in the outlying communities, where, as far as I can understand, government identification cards and driver's licenses are only afforded 1 or 2 times a year when an examiner may go in with their machine and do that. There's also a cost associated. Sometimes affordability can be an issue in terms of being able to afford a government identification card. And with respect to literacy issues, we do have a couple of different ways that individuals in those outlying communities can come in and vote by acquaintance. So they don't need any documentation that proves their identity and residency. They simply have to be known to the election officer. So that can happen at an advance poll, and it can happen in the office of the returning officer as well. And we expanded the voting in the office of the returning officer. So not every community has one, but in the event that there's individuals in the outlying communities that are stuck without identification, if they contact a person in the community, we can generally get a ballot into their hands through that means.
Okay, thanks, Ms. Latour. You okay with that?
I'm okay.
Maybe, Ms. Latour, you mentioned how you did some work with the Chief Electoral Officer in Nova Scotia to develop a strategy to try to engage young Indigenous peoples there. Is that something you might be able to share with us? I don't know, or I don't even know if it's a public document, but I think it might be helpful for us if we could get a copy of that just to see what those folks have done. Is that something you could look into for us?
Yes, I wrote the initial strategy, and I think that they may have it sort of went to them as a draft. They may have refined it, but I don't think that it would be difficult to get a copy from Mr. Temporelli and be able to circulate it to you what they did in the end.
Okay.
And perhaps even solicit some feedback from him for you to sort of learn their lessons learned in the whole process.
Sure, thanks. I think that's helpful for the committee to get. We really appreciate you looking into that for us. Okay, any other questions from committee members? I'm mindful that we have Ms. Cleveland as well. So, but Ms. Cleveland, is there anything you want to ask at this point, or?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I mean, I'm happy to wait to the very end if you would rather, once all of committee has had the opportunity to ask their questions, and then I've got an ongoing list here, but I'm happy to wait as well.
Okay, thanks. We haven't forgotten about you. Just wanted to make you know that we're glad you were able to join us this evening after a long day in the House. So I'm going to turn to Mr. Thompson first. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, in the report it talked about 63 electors being declined during the online voters registration. Can Ms. Latour please explain what reasons resulted in electors not being declined during this process?
Thanks, Mr. Thompson. Ms. Latour?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have an absentee ballot officer, so although many people believe that the online balloting is a fully automated process, it isn't. You make application for your absentee ballot, and it goes to a human who, and as part of that application, you have to upload documentation that approves your identity and residency. And if you can't, you do not get to go to the next step. Your application is declined and you don't get a ballot. So I'm going to say that that's the primary reason people they weren't successful to prove their eligibility.
Thanks, Ms. Latour. Mr. Thompson?
Yeah, so do we have an appeal process? As you said, it's human, and you have an absentee ballot person looking after that. So what is there appeal process for the individuals to appeal it if this happened to them? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Mr. Thompson. Ms. Latour?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Absolutely. And as a matter of fact, interacting with electors through email was very easy and often resulted in phone calls between the absentee ballot officer and the elector themselves to get them across the finish line, so to speak. So sometimes people would make application and there would be essentially a problem with the application, and an email would go back to them, and a period of time passed, or the actual time for an application expired, and whoever was sitting in the queue just did not receive a ballot and are marked as declined.
Okay. Thanks, Ms. Latour. Mr. Thompson?
Yeah, thank you. So do we keep track of the ones that we start out having the challenges and got to the finish line, as you say? Do we keep track of those? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So maybe another way to put this is it was mentioned that 63 were declined in your report. Were any of those appealed, and were they successful, I guess might be another way to put it, but okay. I won't try to paraphrase what Mr. Thompson's saying, but I'll let you go ahead. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, we have a poll book, so everybody is recorded in there, and like I said, for the most part, individuals that were declined are people that just didn't follow through with the process. Anybody who appealed or interacted with us, actually the absentee ballot officer went to some great lengths with some very enthusiastic electors to make sure, and some of them went back and forth for days to make sure that we received what we need, so that we could go ahead and approve their application and allow them, to have their PIN and go ahead.
Okay, thanks, Ms. Latour. Mr. Thompson?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So what I was looking for is, what are those numbers? We we have people that were declined, 63 of them. There was an appeal process. At the end of the day, there were 63 that did not come out and were declined to get the vote online. But, you know, the work that was done by the returning or the online person did a lot of good work. What was her number? What was the numbers of, did she help succeed to go from, you know, through the process? There was challenges, and at the end of the day, we seen somebody finish at the finish line. Because we see 63, but there was a number of other challenges for people that were able to successfully vote. Do we keep track of that number? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Mr. Thompson. Ms. Latour?
Yes, that's the number that cast a ballot. Of the percentage of people that cast a ballot, how many did she interact with and go back and forth with? We don't capture that.
Okay, thanks, Ms. Latour. I know I saw it somewhere in your report, but I don't know if you know this off the top of your head. How many absentee ballots then were cast?
Oh, yes, I wrote this quite a while ago. I think it was 489 was the final number. It went back and forth for a few times, but like I said, the vast majority of individuals, the 63, made an application and just sort of disappeared. Yeah, I'm just looking for the specific page where we break down the poll information.
Yeah, sorry, and I have the report in front of me too, and I know I saw it in here somewhere. So, well, we'll figure that out. Okay. All right. I'm going to go to Mr. Norn next, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know for a lot of my potential constituents at the time, I guess, ask them, like, am I on the voters list? You know, they're wondering, where am I? Like, I don't even know where I'm, like, what my district is, you know, what riding I'm in. So a lot of times, and even in Yellowknife, it's really confusing. And imagine, you know, like communities all around. Like, I envision, you know, a system where I have, you know, like, looking up at the map of the territories, you know, putting in your address and like, this is where you should be voting. Has there ever been any talk about or any discussion about putting your name, your address, and, you know, some of your personal information, putting in and see if you're a registered voter and where you should be voting, just to make sure to clear up some any confusion about where you should be voting, because I know still even now, like, our writing the maps are still quite confusing for a lot of people, and it would be nice to see some less confusion for the next election. Yeah,
thanks, Mr. Nord. And Ms. Cleveland gets a special award because she found the number of the absentee voters that exercised their franchise. On page 45, it's 489 by electronic ballot and 49 by mail. So thanks, Ms. Cleveland. And sorry, I'll turn it over to you, Ms. Latour, to respond to Mr. Norton. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. There's two mechanisms that individuals can go online, and they were on our website, and we marketed them as well. You can go on voter registration to see if you're registered, or to update your information, or just to register as a new elector. You can also go find my polling station and put in your address, and it will indicate to you based on your address where you need to vote. So in Yellowknife in particular, and with your riding, Mr. Norn, there is some confusion as Dilo and Detta are part of Tunadé-Willaday. But a lot of people continue to believe that they're part of Yellowknife North. And so they will show up at the returning officer's office in Yellowknife only to be told that they needed to deal with the returning officer in Fort Resolution for their business. So That has been something since the last Electoral Boundaries Commission made the changes, and that has continued to be somewhat problematic for electors, and perhaps will be a point of discussion in the Boundaries Commission that's due to take place in 2021. 22, maybe.
Yeah, probably something
I'm not-
come back to us at some point, but thanks for that.
I believe it's due. Sorry, Mr. Chair. I believe it's due in 2021. I think.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. And I don't think Mr. Norn has any other questions at this time. So, Mr. Simpson, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd just like to, I guess, ask a question about the voters list. Looking at the one last time, there was a number of, I guess, how often does it get vetted, I guess is one question, to remove deceased people and people who have possibly moved, because I know that the last go around there was probably people that were on there that were probably deceased 3 years before. So I'm just wondering how that vetting process works and how often it's done. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Mr. Simpson. Ms. Latour?
Yeah, so we do get the data out of Inuvik, and anybody, and actually when I call for the data, I call for a wide period to try and overlap it to make sure that actually cover the previous election as well, and right up to just months prior to the event, and then I receive it monthly from them. And they are that data is forwarded to our data managers, and they're removed. So, in the event that decedents still exist on the register, is because perhaps a death certificate didn't make its way to the data. It's not my data. It's only as good as what I receive. So, as far as I know. It's fairly accurate, and then additionally, we use sort of the local knowledge of our returning officers to vet the list, and it's a live list, so the returning officers can make the changes as they see fit as we proceed towards the event.
Thanks, Ms. Latour. Mr. Simpson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just one other question, and it came up during the last election, is that we're lucky in Hay River. It's everybody's kind of in one community there, so we've got north and south. But we do have people who live in, say, the north. They own businesses in the south, and it came down to even though they lived in the north, they were voting in the south, and they didn't have to vote in the north this time, but that was happening. So I'm just wondering how something like that is addressed. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Mr. Simpson. We can hear a dog barking. I don't know where it's barking, but in any event, sorry, Ms. Latour, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. The thing is that the elector is eligible through their primary residence, not their business. So if they did in fact live in the north but had a business in the south, their home is in the north, and that's their electoral district. So the actual identification, the driver's license or combination thereof, must speak to that, but not a business address.
Okay, thanks, Ms. Latour. Mr. Simpson? Okay. Why don't we go to Ms. Cleveland? I think you have some questions you'd like to ask.
Mr. Chair, can you hear me okay? Excellent. So I'll just ask some questions until you tell me to stop, I guess, for a little bit anyway. I just wanted to start off, first off, by just saying I really appreciated the work that your office and your team did in regards to your communications plan and your revamp of branding, your social media that you did leading up to the election and during the election was incredible. It was great to see so much effort and so much thought put into really targeting a whole different demographic. The explainer videos were great. Watched every single one of them. So I just wanted to say a huge thank you because it didn't go unnoticed. And I hope that your office will continue kind of focusing on the younger demographic of voter and kind of revamping again the face of politics. And so thank you for that. I just wanted to ask about the absentee poll. And I was wondering what kind of feedback you got from people who used it as far as timelines were concerned. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Ms. Cleveland. Ms. Latour, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. The feedback for those that used it was very, very good. And I absolutely understand the apprehension that some individual did. And there were some comments, but I think we did the work in terms of, vetting the systems and ensuring the security was there, really stood behind them. Maybe the uptake wasn't super overwhelming, and that's okay because it's just a single poll, and that was one thing that we had to work at dispelling. So it was really about education, and perhaps that should be a little bit more of a focus next time around. But people did use the system, and I think they talked about their experience, and we tried to make that online experience the same as going to a poll. The ballot looked the same, and all the rest. So there was a few things. We developed kind of like a flow chart about what the experience would look like. So before they waded into that waters, they kind of knew. And I think one of the, we can refine that a little bit, but I think the feedback was really good. And, I know Vasi Kapelis asked me on Power and Politics if it failed. And my view of it is that if only 50 people used it, it still got ballots into electors' hands who wanted to vote. And that's the most important thing about it. We had to, like I said, dispel the fact that, no, we weren't doing the entire election online. It was a single poll. And if people didn't feel comfortable that we had ordinary poll and other polls that were in-person polls that they could go to. So, it's a lot of people sat back and I think just took an observation role. And I think next time the uptake could be just as good and probably better. From an administrative perspective, it's more cost effective. And from an elector perspective, we've removed the barriers of inconvenience. If it's inconvenience to go to a bricks and mortar poll, that you can do it. Again, the young electors are very screen oriented. It's something that can be done on a phone, a desktop, a tablet, or whatever. So we had it as an option. I think it's really important we continue to have it as an option, and I think it's only going to get better and probably should gain popularity as we move forward.
Thanks, Ms. Latour. Ms. Cleveland?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you for that. No, I definitely appreciate that response. My next is in regards to September 2nd, when everybody could go down to the office of the returning officer and get themselves registered. And I mean, I only saw the Yellowknife perspective of that, and it went really, really well. And everybody was, there was lots of excitement in the room. Everybody showed up first thing, got their papers in. And I'm just wondering feedback on how that went in communities and what you see is happening differently during the next election. Thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Cleveland. Ms. Latour?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think, in 2015 and again in 2019, we put individuals, we called them additional assistant returning officers, out in the communities. And that allowed, before, it was really difficult for somebody who lived in a small community and didn't have a resident returning officer to file their papers. So that was the first in 2015 that some of the our election officers were able to take nomination papers out in the communities. And that's a great, I think that's a great thing. It's fair. It's more fair than it used to be for individuals who are seeking candidacy and not in a large center. The overall experience, I think, in Office of the Returning Officers is really good this time around, and that was for a couple of reasons. We the registration in the Office of the Returning Officers went up, and also voting in the Office of the Returning Officers also went up. So individuals that went in to register realized that they could just cast a ballot in the moment. That saved them time and everything, and they did it. And we're seeing an upswing across the country in early voting opportunities. People just don't want to be kind of pigeonholed to one day standing in line. They have busy lives, and so if they can attend this poll or that poll and kind of work it into their schedules or do it online, I think that was a contributing factor to increased attendance. So I think we're just going to keep on doing what we're doing. On that first day when candidates in there and there's all that excitement, it can be pretty hectic. But I think it's a great thing. I mean, they want to get out of the gates and go and do it. So everything went really well. I made the recommendation in 2015 to expand the time frame for voting in the Office of the Returning Officer. We went from 10 days to 21, 22 days, and that was really appreciated. The only thing it's not a complaint, but it was comments made, was around the absentee poll, and actually some comments from candidates who really enjoyed the real-time struck list. So anytime anybody went in, we have the technology just to take them off the list, and candidates can sort and see who's attended and who hasn't attended. Is when I turned that off on Saturday, a few days before the poll, I got a lot of calls saying, "Oh, our lists aren't working, your system's broken." And I said, "No, now we're reverting back to the paper system." And not a lot of that. The NDBT really leads in modernization of what we're doing. And if we do take the next step, and I don't really talk about it, but if we take the next step in 2023 to put in electronic poll books at polling centers, voting online could actually continue, right? And that was the other major complaint was, well, I want my ballot now. The act is explicit saying, here's the application period for the absentee ballot. And once it's cut off and we stop taking applications, we got a fair bit of blowback from people. And, it's unfortunate. I have to explain to them that's the way the act is written. And I've subsequently put forward a recommendation to allow the chief electoral officer to make that determination. So if we introduce this final piece of electronic poll books, we would be a fully automated system where people could vote at home, even if they didn't want to go to the poll that day, right up until, just before 8 p.m. and cast their ballots that way. Candidates would continue to get information right up that way. And the reason we can't do that now, and I had to cut it off, is because we can't risk somebody applying for an online ballot or a mail-in ballot and voting through that mechanism and then showing up at a poll 5 minutes later and voting yet again. So when they're issued the electronic ballot or the mail ballot, they're struck from the register and from the list, and that needs to show up on a tablet or something for the officer in the polling station to say, well, you've received your ballot, you've already voted, you've been struck as having voted. So that's the final connection. So if we want to become fully automated, it's something certainly we can look at. I think there's some barriers for that in terms of connectivity in the Northwest Territories, but it's I hope I've answered your question in that. I think we're heading in the right direction in terms of the polls that we have and what we did in the Office of the Returning Officers and in the experience for individuals seeking candidacy out in the communities, have a mechanism to remain in their community and have their nomination papers checked and accepted.
Okay, thanks, Ms. Latour. Ms. Cleveland? Anything else?
Yeah, thank you very much for that. And I appreciate your your hard work, wanting to continue modernizing voting in the NWT and also increasing accessibility. So I definitely appreciate that. My last question is just in regards to election expenses. Can I ask about election expenses right now, Mr. Chair?
Sure. I think any questions about the conduct of the election, that's what we're here to talk about. Please go ahead.
Okay. Thank you very much. So just in regards to election expenses, I mean, that's probably one of the most stressful things when you're running a campaign, is just making sure that you're tracking everything and that you're filling out your paperwork properly and stuff like that. And so I have a question about alcohol as an election expense. And I'm just wondering about, I guess, committee's view on that, and also Ms. Latour's view on that as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Cleveland. Ms. Latour?
I'm not completely sure of the question that she's asking. I mean, alcohol, I think it's explicit in the Act how it's written right now. Are you coming from a fundraiser perspective? Or are you talking about the prohibition recommendation?
Thanks, Ms. Latour. I think the question might have been around, is liquor an allowable election expense? Thanks, Mr. Thanks. Go ahead. Yeah, getting a thumbs up from Ms. Cleveland. I think that's what she was asking. Go ahead, Ms. Latour.
It's not as it's just I don't think that people appreciate alcohol, and it gets really just a hair away from bribery and things of that nature. That it's definitely something when it comes to fundraising that is not recommended.
Okay, thanks, Ms. Latour. Ms. Cleveland, are you okay now with questions? Anything further? Okay, we're getting a thumbs up. I know we've got Mr. Thompson with another question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I have 3 questions. 2 of them hopefully be real quick. The first question is that there seems to be a difference in the report. On page 23, it says there's 3,239 young voters casted ballots, but on page 40 it said 3,278. Is there a reason there's 2 different numbers there? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Ms. Latour. Or sorry, Mr. Thompson. Ms. Latour, I'm not sure you caught the 2 page numbers. It was page 23 and page 40. Seems to be different numbers for young voters. Thanks.
Okay. I'm not sure. Page 23, you said?
Yes, please.
So what number were you referring to, Mr. Thompson? Sorry, Mr. Chair, can you?
So the numbers that I seen were 3,239 young voters casted ballots, and on page 40 it says 3,278 young voters casted the ballot.
On page 40, did you say?
Yes, correct.
I can't really explain that at this point in time.
Okay, thanks. Why don't we leave that one with you, and if you want to get back to us on that, I think that'd be appreciated. I'll just turn it back to Mr. Thompson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. On page 21, it talks about official results there and registered electors in that. For Nahanni View, it had 19 elected, but in 2015 there were 73 elected voters. Is there a reason why the numbers were so extreme in difference? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Ms. Thompson. Is there a page of the
Page
report? Oh, page 21. Sorry, I'm looking at page 21 and it doesn't look like this. Oh, this is from the official results report for 2019. It's not the report on the administration of the election. So that's page 21 official results report. Thanks.
Sorry about that.
Sorry, I'm sorry, but can you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, thanks. I'm going to turn it back to Mr. Thompson, and he'll get you on the right report here as well. So please, Mr. Thompson, go ahead.
Yeah, so sorry about that. I apologize. So in the official results report for 2019, on page 21 for Nahende, it had down registered electors, and they had Nahende Butte as 19, but 2015 the number was at 73. So was there a reason for the difference in the numbers? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Mr. Thompson. So I think what he's saying is there was a lot fewer people on the voters list in the Honey Butte in 2019 than there was in 2015. And if you have any insights as to why that was, thanks. Go ahead, Ms. Latour.
But, well, probably just the work that we've done in ensuring the correctness, of the list. After the 2015 election, we did extensive work in removing individuals from the register, and in the 4 years, how many have moved or whatever. I'm going to stand behind the accuracy of the 2019 number, and the best thing that I can theorize on is it's just the number differs because we've cleaned up the list in that manner.
Okay, thanks, Ms. Latour. Mr. Thompson?
Thank you. My last question, in regards to, we changed from 2015 from a Monday to 2019 to a Tuesday vote. Did you see any impact, a difference of this voter turnout, I guess, on that day, Monday versus Tuesday? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Mr. Thompson. Yeah, please go ahead, Ms. Latour. I know this was something that you actually recommended going to a different day, I think, in your last report. So please go ahead.
Yeah, in 2015, I actually recommended moving to a Saturday, which is the most popular day in the world to vote. Actually, it may be a Sunday. So the second most popular, as most jurisdictions in Canada are moving. And I got a little bit surprised by the Tuesday, but I don't think that it had any impact. And when we're looking at a 10% increase, I can't say that that making that move harmed the event and the attendance in any way.
Thanks, Ms. Latour. Mr. Thompson doesn't have any questions. We've got one. Certainly this was an issue in Frame Lake. At each of and may not get all the terminology right, so my apologies, but at each of the polls, there was like a poll result form that was basically generated, but there wasn't anything like that for the absentee ballots, for the electronic and the mail-in ballots. That caused some confusion. Is it possible to generate that kind of a form for the absentee ballots? And I know you're recommending going to a different approach in the future, but is it possible to generate some kind of report in the future that could be given to candidates, to the polling agents, so that they can see what happened with the absentee ballots? Is that possible in the future? Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, it certainly could be. The difference with the absentee ballot, and I mean, it is currently administered and counted in the Office of the Chief Electoral Officer with witnesses present, is that that particular statement of poll incorporates the entire, all 19 districts or how many ever districts that we're having contests in. So it's not the same as a statement of poll for a polling division. But to make it available, it does. Those numbers are provided to candidates through the official edition form. They're included in there. They're broken out. Some numbers we combine, as you know, because they're very, very small. We don't report them together, or we don't report them. Sorry, separately. Report them together to protect the integrity of the event, as there may only be one or two attendees at a poll.
Yeah, okay, thanks for that. Yeah, I think if there was a way to generate that, I know you get all the absentee ballots in from across the NWT, but if there was a way to break it down by electoral district and provide some kind of a form or something, I think that might avoid some problems in the future. But I'm looking at my colleagues here. I think we've been through a good part of the report here. Do we have any questions about the recommendations that Ms. Latour has made in her report? Nobody has any questions about the recommendations?
Just checking my notes.
Just
Yeah, same here.
sure. Well, I'm going to ask, you've got, I think, your Division B recommendations where you basically make a couple of recommendations around, a series of consistent recommendations around absentee ballots and trying to sort of split between the mail and the electronic ballots, which makes sense to me, but maybe you could just walk us through some of your reasoning there. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I know that's the lion's share of the recommendations. It makes it look like such a monumental task to get through them. But what I tried to do there is take it section by section and also provide what the new legislation could look like. And it was very confusing, not only for electors, but for some of our election officers as well, because everybody was referring to the online ballot. The mail-in ballots, the vast majority of those that we have, the 49, were administered through a different course of action in the correctional facilities in the NWT. I think there was only half a dozen that actually went out to private citizens, and quite surprising number of them went Yellowknife. But regardless, that is a mail ballot. And that's it. I think it's as we continue to evolve, that we should identify it and avoid the confusion. So when they're calling in and they're asking for an absentee ballot, or they were directing them to online to make their application, that they absolutely know that that one is going to go in the mail, and this one you're going to participate on an online platform. And also in that. The multi-district poll that was introduced for the first time, it went in I think it was a 2007 recommendation, and so it was exercised in 2011, is obsolete. So we're still putting ballots in hands of people in multi-districts through the other means, primarily through the mail or through the online. So the multi-dist was primarily set, I think, for diamond workers. And there was some concerns about individuals on campuses, rural college campuses, and also for individuals, incarcerated individuals. So those needs are being met now through the mail, online, or through the expanded voting in the office of the returning officer that the multi-disc poll, it wasn't very effective to begin with, and it's unnecessary. But I think we need to take what we know as the absentee poll and define them as their own individual polls, one that's administered through the postal system and one that's administered online. So it looks a little scarier than it is, I think.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, just on the multi-district polls, I think you're recommending repeal of those provisions, but would we be better served to keep them to allow for that option in the future rather than repeal it completely? I don't know, any thoughts around that? Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I have to tell you that it was just a very, very poorly attended poll. At the Yellowknife campus in 2015, we had 0 uptake. So it just sort of goes to show. I mean, we're spending a lot of money, and there was no uptake. So I think that with the individuals that may be attending Aurora campuses throughout the north, that they can absolutely access a ballot without administering this multi-district poll. And the only ones that wouldn't be able to were the correctional facilities. And we actually reverted back to the way that they had been served prior to the multi-district poll being administered to them. And also in 2015, we had an incident, a fairly, concerning incident around the security of election officers going into a correctional facility. And I think the process that we've developed now is much safer for all involved. So the mail is what it used to be for correctional facilities, and the individuals at campuses and in diamond mines, I think they're participating online.
Okay. I'm just looking at my colleagues here. Mr. Thompson, please go ahead.
Yeah, I have 2. It's recommendation number 5 and recommendation number 9. So I'll just do number 5 first. So in there you talk about the CEO to enter an agreement with any government or organization to receive information. Do you have an agreement? Do you currently have an agreement with other GNWT departments that are not in the Act presently, like medical insurance, SFA, and corrections? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Mr. Thompson. Ms. Latour, please go ahead.
Yeah, I've provided in the recommendation that the subsection could read as follows. So that what's in black is what currently exists, and the red is what I would recommend be added to the Act. So making sure that we get the dates of birth and citizenship is critical to determining eligibility. And then for the proposed D, it deals with motor vehicle information that we can't access at the moment.
I will wait for my last one if anybody else.
Okay, thanks, Ms. Latour. Any other questions from committee members? Mr. Norn, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I have questions on recommendation 1 and 9 as well. So, any comments? So one here deals with election witnesses. So I guess with this, when you're working in polling stations, small communities, so to get witnesses sometimes can be quite difficult. And the Act, from my understanding, is there's a witness is required when no polling agent is available. So there might be some training issues here. I'm not sure how this will be worked out, but was this a problem in this election? And so what was the fix for this?
Okay. Thanks, Mr. Norn. Ms. Latour, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We're the only jurisdiction, I believe, that remains with witnesses. That's a legacy type of legislation, I think, that came forward when the act was initially written. Our election officers are under oath, and I think that they could be trusted to count a poll and report accurately and honestly on the numbers. So there's that issue. Quite often at the close of polls, there may be a scramble to get these two witnesses to come forward. So it's problematic from an administrative point of view. But what we noticed this time is that there is no definition of election witnesses. So if the witness is something that is going to stay with us, I think we need to define it. What we did find happening was quite a few polling agents of candidates were demanding the $50 payment that we also have by legislation to provide to anybody that serves as an election witness. So we spend quite a bit of time and money, and we tracked it in my 2015 report. I think there's 9 different steps and hands that payments have to go through. So we're spending probably a few $100s to generate these $50 checks to these witnesses, which, like I said, some of the election officers are why do we need it? They're a little bit I don't know, testy about not being trusted or something. But then the cost associated with pumping out a $50 check, but it was further complicated by official agents demanding when election witnesses, and this happened in much higher frequency and was quite concerning, demanding to fill out a witness paper and be paid the $50 when they were actually, in fact, a polling agent. So the candidates are welcome to have their people witness counts. Election witnesses are primarily there due to the legislation, and for that inconvenience, if they're a late elector, sometimes polling officers will ask them to stay behind and serve in that role so we can conform with the act. So the whole practice, I think, is what I'd like to have reviewed. And I think by defining it, if it does stay, that it's specific that if you're serving as a polling agent, you're not going to be remunerated $50.
Thanks, Ms. Latour. So I know that Mr. Norn and Mr. Thompson want to discuss recommendation number 9. So I think Mr. Simpson's going to leave the room. And just for the record, he has about to leave the room and is leaving the room so that we can have, because he declared a conflict on this item. So
For sure.
I'll know for the record that he has left the room. So Mr. Norm, why don't you go ahead?
Just before I get to recommendation number 9, I'll just go back, and thank you for that response from Ms. Latour for the last question. I heard something really key there, was that we're the only jurisdiction that deals with election witnesses the way they do. So what are other jurisdictions doing right now in terms of this type of issue?
Thanks, Mr. Norm. Ms. Latour, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, the deputy returning officer and the poll clerk all swear oaths. So as long as there's the two, the deputy returning officer signs that's the actual numbers, and the polling clerk is there to witness that count, and the numbers reported reflect the count, that should be enough. In my view. So that's what's happening in other jurisdictions. The election officers are trusted to do that.
Okay. All right. Thanks for that. So I'm going to go to Mr. Thompson, who indicated first he wants to, might have a question about recommendation number 9. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In recommendation number 9, I guess my question is, how is indebtedness dealt with in other provinces and jurisdictions election law? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, or Mr. Thompson. Ms. Latour, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have not done a comparative analysis about indebtedness. I didn't think that was necessary at this juncture. I'm certainly happy to go ahead and gather information. The concerns that were brought forward were specific to other legislation in the NWT, and so that is sort of, I just stayed within the confines of our territory.
Okay, thanks. Mr. Thompson?
Yeah, I guess this concerns me because we have different legislation for different municipalities, bands, and GNWT. And so what I'm hearing is we're trying to synchronize all three together. Is this correct? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Mr. Thompson. Ms. Latour?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. What was consistently brought forward was a comparison to the Local Authorities Elections Act. And in that act, it is specific. I believe I touched upon which section it was even, that you can't have any, you can't owe any monies in order to run for mayor or council or whatnot. Quite often, the electorate is very confused about federal, territorial, and municipal events. It's just blurred lines for them. So a lot of people were very concerned that somebody could be elected to the assembly while owing money, and I think that I put that recommendation forward. You can see it's clearly marked for review, and I know that there was some media on it this week, and I did try and clarify with the gentleman. It's not a recommendation to bar. It's a recommendation to have a discussion, because the electorate can be confused by the two different sets of candidate eligibility criteria in the acts, that you may want to look at it. And perhaps it's not even an issue for the Elections and Plebiscites Act. Perhaps it needs to be removed from the other act. So people say, well, you shouldn't be able to, you shouldn't owe money and be allowed to be an MLA if it's not the same for mayor and council. So I get that, and I felt compelled to put it forward. But I think that we have to be careful in examining individuals' financial, and this was some of the discussions that I've had with people, as somebody's affordability or financial circumstance should not necessarily preclude them from running for leadership. But I understand the confusion, and that's my suggestion in this recommendation, is that legislators talk amongst themselves. I mean, should it still continue to exist in the other act, or should it be added so that it's standardized for running for public office in the Northwest Territories?
Thanks, Ms. Latour. Mr. Thompson?
Thank you, Ms. Latour, for that explanation. I guess I'm struggling with a couple of things, but I guess most importantly is we have bands, Métis councils, they have election rules. They have their own process. We have municipalities, hamlets, towns, and villages, which has theirs. And we have something that's with the federal or territorial government, and there's the federal government. So, I mean, there's some confusion. If we're trying to link the plebiscite or the NWT with the municipalities one to the territorial one, what about Indigenous governments who don't have the same rules? So again, to me, we have four different entities that have potentially four different rules. And so that concerns me, is that we're trying to make the NWT, and I apologize, it's been a long day, the municipalities, how they do it, and we're trying to make it the same as with the NWT as in the government of the Northwest Territories in our election process. And again, that there is my concern is that we seem to be trying to take the territorial government and put it into a municipality rules. And so that is a concern for me. And without having more information, I don't know where to go with it, because we want to make informed, evidence-based decisions. And without knowing what other jurisdictions doing, that is a concern for me. So I appreciate your offer to do some research and get back to us on that. I think that's very important before we make a decision. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Mr. Thompson. Ms. Latour, anything else you want to add about this at this point?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The only thing I can say is the bands, the municipal level governments and the territorial level governments, all there's different acts, different pieces of legislation, and not every piece of legislation is the same. So it was quite clear in our legislation that indebtedness to a government, because other people have a debt that's not to the government. I think the Local Elections Authority Act is specific to if you're in debt to a town or a hamlet or village, whatever it may be, then you can't run. And it's put forward because of the level of concern for discussion to you. I administer the Elections Act, the Plebiscites Act, so it's clearly written for me, and I'm indifferent as to which way it goes, but I certainly commit to providing you with comparative analysis of what other provincial and territorial jurisdictions, their eligibility, if it includes specifics around indebtedness. My point is that as sometimes the electorate can be confused, they don't, and this is the main gist of the concern, is how can you be precluded from running for a municipal level government but run for the territorial, which in many eyes is viewed as a higher level of government? So that's the discussion for you to have amongst yourselves, and if you're content with how the act reads, that's absolutely acceptable to me. And if you think that you should fall in line with the municipal and include a bit on that, that's fine. But like I said, and I've had this discussion, as I said, with other people, it could very well come down to discussion: is indebtedness something that should be removed from the other act? Could it be a charter challenge, affordability, and a person's financial predicament not allowing them to run for leadership? So that's why the recommendation is marked for review and discussion. But to help you along in that, I will provide you with what the other jurisdictions in Canada do or don't do.
Yeah, thanks, Ms. Latour. Yeah, and I see in your report on page 62, it is marked review as opposed to amend. So, and I expect that we're going to get some public input or feedback on this as well. But Mr. Norton, did you have any other questions on number 9? Please go ahead.
Yes, I had a quick comment on this, Mr. Chair. So I looked at this and thought about this, and you heard stuff in the video. I don't try not to pay too much attention to media, but because we're privy to a lot more here in this house than most. But after really thinking about this, when we're elected into office, we're held to a higher standard, and even more so, even when you're in cabinet. I think we're even at that standard is even higher. So when I think about this, you think about other sort of professions. If you're going into securities, or if you're going into as a financial advisor, they're expected to have sort of this screening there to go in, and if you're seen to have been not deemed fit to manage money, I think it's important that that you know what you're getting into and screening properly. You know. Or if you're working for, say, trusted positions, like say if you're a police officer or something, they do those screening processes. You know, like where you don't want an officer that breaks the law or owes a lot of money. You want to see somebody that has a higher standard. I think it's important that, especially if we're passing in a $1.8 billion budget, we need that public confidence, knowing that we know that we're responsible for how we spend our money too as well. I think that when we come into office, comes with the job. We need to hold ourselves there. So I guess that's where I'm going at this year. I think that if I was running for office and I owed a lot of money to, say, a land tax or something like that, and I wasn't watching it, or maybe irresponsible. I don't know what everybody's situation is different, but I think it's important that when you declare these, you have to declare these kind of things, one, and then if I'm deemed not fit to even manage my own money or pay my own taxes, for example. I mean, how am I going to be seen? How am I going to be seen if I went to say if a finance portfolio? I think that would be something to think about. So I guess that's where I stand on this. I think we should be coming into this office. We should be held to a higher standard. I think our screening. We should have some sort of safeguards for that. So those are my thoughts on that. Thanks, Joe.
Thanks, Mr. Bernard. I think I'll take that more as a comment than a question for Ms. Latour. But any other questions on this matter for Ms. Latour? Because if not, I'm going to ask the clerk to invite Mr. Simpson back into the room. Okay, we'll do that, please. I'll just wait for Mr. Simpson to come back in. Thanks, and for the record, Mr. Simpson has joined us again. So any other questions for Ms. Latour on any part of her report, recommendations, anything from committee members? I know it's been a very long day. Okay, I don't see anything further. Ms. Latour, I just want to take sorry, Mr. Thompson. Last call.
Yeah, sorry. I just want to, if we have other questions that come up, Ms. Latour, can we just send them to you and you can get us a written response? Thank you.
Sure, thanks.
Sure.
Mr. Thompson, yeah, and I see that Ms. Latour is shaking her head yes. And I think last time we did have a few extra questions or something for you, and you kindly responded. So following our review, we may have a few more things that we want to chat with you about or correspond with you about. So I want to thank you for your time this evening, and for the members of the public who have tuned in to watch the proceeding. And sorry, Ms. Cleve, you don't have any further before we sign off here? No? I think she's saying she's good. So thanks again. Any closing remarks before we sign off?
No, thank you for this opportunity, and I'm absolutely available for any additional questions or clarification, and I'll get back to you on the things I've taken note of to provide you with the additional information.
Great. Yeah, thanks very much. And I personally want to thank you for your hard work during the election. The report, there's some really great graphics in there. It's well laid out. Really appreciate the time and effort that went into it. So with that, we'll sign off on the public part of our meeting, and we are going to, I need a motion to move in camera. Mr. Thompson, and thanks to everybody who's joined us virtually. We're okay going into camera session? Okay, thanks.
Good night.
Good night. Thank you.